Welcome again to the Write Project podcast. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture here on 93.5 FM or online at chmr.ca. Wherever you're listening from, we're happy to have you. Today we're talking to Kelley Power, the Vice President of WANL, continuing our conversation from last week. Kelley Power is a native Newfoundlander. Her work has won the Newfoundland and Labrador Arts and Letters competition for digital multimedia, and she won the 48-hour writing marathon 2017. So it's easy to define genre. How do you define literary fiction? Because to me, literary fiction is a genre of exclusion. The same way we have diseases of exclusion, where like you can't test for. I don't mean to say literary fiction is a disease. I love reading lit fiction, but by what I mean by the exclusion thing, where there's some ailments that you may get in your life that they can't test for, and what they do is they test for all the other possible causes of your symptoms.
I see.
And if nothing else fits, then it's like, oh, it must be this thing. So it's not, they don't pin it, they knock down all the other pins until there's nothing left, but, oh, you have this. So I feel like literary fiction is a genre of exclusion, where you go, okay, are there spaceships in the sky? No, it's not sci-fi. Are there dwarves? No, okay, it's not fantasy. And you just knock down all the other genres, and when there's nothing left, you shrug your shoulders and you go, okay, well, it's lit fiction then.
I love that entire breakdown.
That in no way compared literary fiction to a disease.
I think it's a brilliant way to describe it. I'm not sure that I agree with it.
Okay, please. What's lit fiction to you? Because to me, it's just the absence of genre elements.
So I'll pull back for a second to say that I have been doing a fair amount of reading about that over the last year, based on coming into the Writers Alliance and learning more about all types of writing. So coming into the Writers Alliance, I've just learned about all types of writing and all types of writers. And not that I wouldn't have been aware of this before, but it probably just didn't matter to me. But it's the first time I'd really had to be part of a conversation where people were talking about the differences between, or the relative seriousness or value of one type over another, literary versus genre. It's just, I read everything.
Yeah, me too.
So it didn't matter to me before to even think about that particular question. But because those conversations would come up, for example, going to a place where you're talking to more genre writers, or going to a place where you're talking to more literary fiction writers, somehow the discussion might just come up. So like, all right, well, I'd like to educate myself on that, because I think it's incumbent on me as a board member at the Writers Alliance to understand that discussion takes place within the community. So in doing that and reading about it, and I am not an English major, I'm not a literary critic, I'm a very superficially educated person on this matter, but when I've seen other people writing about it, I've seen it expressed, the differences expressed between literary fiction and genre fiction in lots of different ways. It's really interesting to me to see how that discussion is taking place out there in the universe. One would be that genre fiction is plot-driven and pace-driven, whereas literary fiction is driven by ideas and characters. Totally not true.
No.
Absolutely not true. Another one would be that genre is escapist, whereas literary fiction is about being tough and evaluating some kind of hard. It's hard to read it because it should be hard to read it because you're challenging yourself with things. Not true. It's absolutely not true.
No, and there's a lot of escapism in Hemingway, but the escapism isn't necessary. The escapism is not a starship. It's this bohemian lifestyle.
Right, and there you go. I mean, you've dug a little deeper into it even than me. I read some of those perspectives, and I say, I just call bullcrap on that. That's just not on. Another one I saw was genres about creating these spaces and these worlds, and it's the characters are very important to it and what they're going through, but the view and the scope of the world that it occurs in is very important. Whereas in literary fiction, the introspective, self-evaluative elements of it and the detail to which they're examined are the more important part. It could occur anywhere. It could occur in space. It could occur in somebody's bedroom for the entirety of the novel. It's more about what's going on with this person or with this person and a more limited number of relationships. That I could see has some truth, but it does in some way suggests that that does not happen in genre, and I don't think that's true either.
No, I had an argument when I was going up through doing my English honors degree. And you get to a point where you start doing theory. And what lit theory is basically trying to find, and they never have found one, but trying to find a theory, a method of thought that can be used to analyze all literature. And what they found is a variety of ones that can evaluate some literature or most literature, but there's some things that still escape it. But what always bothered me was that the examples of novels that they chose were ones that have those things, like, and anything else they kind of exclude, like where it's like, if they're studying, my favorite's Freudian theory. So if you're studying Freudian theory and you only study books that have been kind of pre-vetted to have included Freudian theory, then of course it's going to look like that theory holds weight. So what I did for a while was like, let's see if this works, and I read the trashiest comics from the 90s. Like, the worst era of comics objectively. Everything was bad, the writing was inconsequential, and went looking for Freudian theory and was able to find it. Like, if you look, you can find it. And to me, that's it's harder to stretch your muscles and find theory in trash that's written to entertain for a few minutes and then be discarded than it is to find. And you can. Like, I would like to see those exercises. I'd like to see, like, you can put theory into just about any writing. I'm a big theory buff. I love theory. But I hate that there's this wall where it's like, oh no, we'll only apply theory to works of literature because that's what counts. And it's like, well, no, if it's a theory that it's supposed to apply to everything, then let's have fun and apply it to everything.
Right.
Let's sit down in front of this episode of Teletubbies and try to put literary theory into it. Let's get some alcohol. Like, just like, okay, we have to take a shot every time they say again. Like... Again.
I'm so happy I never watched that show.
Oh my lord.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of my age that I did not come around in the Teletubbies era.
Yeah. That's the clip for the promo.
And you're far more versed in those elements of it than I am, which, as we're having this conversation at CHMR on Munn campus, I'm envisioning if this was live, the entire English department is just going to come over here and storm the building saying, Kelley Power and WANL, you have no idea what you're talking about. Stop talking about stuff you don't know anything about.
Yeah.
You're only going to scratch the surface of what it is. This entire discussion has been happening, this idea of literary fiction. And I'm going to say versus because that seems to be how it's always approached. It's one against the other.
Which is weird.
Which is strange. And here's where I came down to in all of this. Yeah, okay. Here's where I came down to into all of this. I think what we're all interested in, above whatever the book is about or whatever's going on with the characters, if it's in a genre, if it's considered literary fiction, I'm not so much interested in that discussion anymore because what I found is that it goes on indefinitely. It goes on, more people now are saying things like, well, legitimate literary fiction writers are now they're starting to see the value in genre and, doing the research on it. It's like Cormac McCarthy and Kate Atkinson and Jennifer Egan. None of those people I've read. I haven't read Cormac McCarthy. So I know him, but I haven't read any of his stuff. Saying how these writers now are kind of putting their toe in the genre water, and it's showing how there's more recognition of genre having all of this value. But you'll just as quickly find an article written a month later that says, no, that's just not true, I disagree with it. These are not people that are writing in genre, they're using genre to express literary ideas. And I'm like, come on, guys, how much further are we going to split this hair?
Yeah.
So what I've come back around to is I'm not as interested in that discussion as I am in the discussion around good writing.
Yep, exactly.
Good writing. I mean, it's about good writing. And why don't we focus more on that? Because I feel like I say this over and over again, but the rising tide floats all boats. I mean, having good writing out there benefits absolutely everybody. And just to wind it back into the Writers Alliance, that's the conversation I'm interested in having. Yeah, how do we enhance the quality of writing? And it doesn't matter to me where you're from or what you're doing or how you're approaching your subject matter.
Yep.
Let's just all be better writers.
No, I agree, absolutely.
Which is why it's so disheartening when I talk to teachers and I talk to profs, I'm hearing all this stuff about how the quality of writing is just swirling down a giant toilet of ineptitude, and I'm like, no, say it ain't so.
Okay, that's not true. Isn't it? There was a quote last week that I think I will quote forever, where I can't remember who said it. It was on Twitter of all things, but it was, isn't it interesting how the best stuff always comes out when you're the most impressionable? Like, weird.
Fascinating coincidence.
Weird, isn't it? How, like, you know what I mean? Like, where it's like, oh, that's weird. How nothing will ever be better than the version of the thing that came out when you were at your most impressionable.
Yeah.
Oh, if only you could stay at that stage.
Yeah. Kind of like, the era that you want to revisit is the one that happened about 20 years before you're the age you are right now. It's like, that was the best time. Before the internet. Before this happened. Before that happened. That was the best time.
Yeah.
It's always that way.
And 20 years ago it was, no, the 50s were the best time.
I'm not a Woody Allen fan by any stretch, but his movie Midnight in Paris, I don't know if you've seen that.
Nope.
And he's not in the movie, which is probably what makes it great. But it's Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams is in it. I cannot remember the French actress.
Do they have good actors too?
Oh, it was, what was her name? There's a French actress in it who plays off Owen Wilson. Michael Sheen is in it. Kathy Bates is in it for a bit. So it's quite a mixed cast, as his movies tend to be. But Owen Wilson is a writer, and they're in Paris. And through this odd act, he finds himself getting picked up in an old sort of Hemingway era, so 1940s, vehicle that takes him from his present time in Paris back to that time when Hemingway and Gertrude Stein and the surrealists were all hanging out in Paris, and how he envisioned this to be, this was the time. If only I could have lived during this time. And part of that involves him meeting this woman, and as the movie plays out, her ideal time was the golden age, 50 years before that.
Yeah.
It's like, that was the best time. So the entire movie is about this idea of our nostalgia creates a lens through which we view these times as being the more idealized period, or the one that we fit into most. So we all have that. It's a great movie to watch.
That sounds like a genre time travel movie that has a lot of literary significance.
There you go.
Interesting.
Isn't it?
Isn't it? What was the first book that got you interested in reading?
When I was in my primary school, we had a great little library, and I picked up this book one time called The Hotel Cat, and it was a novel-ish type of book. I mean, it wouldn't have been a terribly big novel. I couldn't have been more than probably 8 at the time, so it wasn't overly complex, but I remember devouring that book, and I can't tell you why.
You ate it?
Yes, I ate it. It tasted a little moldy.
Okay.
I loved that book, and I obviously loved it, because I remember to this day that I read that book, and I absolutely loved it, and it was just about a cat living in a hotel with other people and animals, and something happens toward the end of the book, and the cat rescues people, and I don't know, I found it, there are some fantastical elements in that. Maybe I was just always destined to be reading that kind of fiction, because I probably have a leaning toward it even today.
Oh.
Can I give you a different answer to that question?
Yes.
Or an alternative answer to that.
Okay.
Because it's not one I would have read. There's a book called Our Universe, and it was produced in the 70s by National Geographic. And I remember it's a hardcover book, and it had the spaceship on the cover, the stars. So it's a book about different elements of the universe, but it had these vibrant colors on the glossy pages. As a kid, to turn those pages was absolutely amazing, but they had concept drawings of what life might look like on all of our different planets in the solar system, all these fantastical creatures and plant life that would be there. And when they did the planet descriptions, they had an illustration of the god that was associated with that particular planet. So, a drawing of Mars. And I remembered that book so well as a kid. I was talking to my brother about it about, 6 months ago, and he remembered it, and he's 8 years younger than me. So that book would have been in tatters by the time he saw it. So it's a book with this massive depth of impression about not just itself as a book to engage you, but as it makes you think about and opens up your imagination to things. So I went online and I bought 2 used copies, and I have one for me now, and I gave one to my brother for his birthday, and I could not be more excited.
Awesome. I have a follow-up question. If the planets were discovered today, Like, if we were just now discovering the other members of our solar system, would they all be named after Harry Potter characters?
I would say, I'm not sure, but I can definitely say that they would have the kind of gender and ethnic diversity that's reflected in the characters that J.K. Rowling created.
Yeah, I can tell you, I was looking up animals and insects that were discovered last year, and one is the Gryffindor spider, because it actually is a new breed of spider they've discovered, and the back of it, like, that's usually very round, looks like a sorting hat. It looks just like it. So it is even the Latin term for it is Gryffindorius something. Like, it's...
Love it.
So we can already see that, no, absolutely, they are just naming stuff after Harry Potter now, just like back in the day it was Greek mythology.
Yeah, it's our modern myths, our modern mythological heroes.
Okay.
That's what I say. I mean, those characters are mythologized to a great degree, I think, in those books. So yeah, I stand by that.
Yeah. What was the first book that made you cry?
The first book that made me cry was probably Anne of Green Gables.
Really? But that's a nice book.
Well, Matthew dies.
Oh, spoilers.
At the end. Oh.
Spoilers for this 100-year-old text.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, no.
That's the first book I remember crying at. It's possible that there were ones before that. I should add, I'm not a big crier, so it's going to be few and far between. Like, the other one I can remember really, really getting a good cry on for was Marley and Me, but that was much more recent, and I'm sure I cried at
I'm trying to remember
that.
an earlier book from me, but I can't seem to think past The Time Traveler's Wife. And I know I was just, like, in my 20s when I read that, but that's the one I remember being like, nope, done, too many problems. Don't like it.
Gotta put it away.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you had to hide the book in the freezer, like on Friends, where it's like, no, just can't get me in there. Does writing energize you, or does it exhaust you? Because I feel like there's a pretty good 50-50 divide between those two things, where people start out with energy, and then at the end they're just like, they feel like a husk, like this has taken all this out of them. Or people who get that endorphin buzz and they start out slow and like, oh, I need my coffee, and by the end of it, it's like, all right, let's get the day started.
I am definitely energized by writing, and it is incredibly difficult to start. I am like a bird looking at shiny things when I sit down at the computer. It's like, oh, what's that over there? Oh, what's that over there? I'm distracted. I'm procrastinating. But once I get into it, and especially if I'm content with the progress I've made, I'm really energized by it. And I don't know, it's kind of like it's like a bit of a drug, if I can say that. It's just like a hit of something when I get to a point where I'm content with what I've got, and I can stand up and feel like, okay, it's like I've done the most important thing in my day now, and the rest of the day is just gravy.
That's nothing what drugs are like. That's not drug. Like, that's not what drugs are like.
Does it depend on the drug?
No.
You take the...
Yeah. Have you ever gotten reader's block? Like, where you just cannot get into any book and you get frustrated with the process of reading?
I have definitely had that. I have found it's periodic and tied to... I can usually tie it to something.
An author?
No, because I'll just close that book and I'll move right on if it's a particular author.
I've tried a few times with William Gibson and do not understand. Also Tolkien, but my antipathy toward Tolkien is well documented.
You have a partner in arms there. I'm not a fan of written Tolkien, and I know that that's like an offense punishable by death. But
it's dry.
It is dry. I've never even attempted to read Lord of the Rings because I read The Hobbit, and I said, that's enough of that. I can't see myself going through 3 tomes of this after I've done The Hobbit. Now, my brother... Tomb is a great
term for it, because you'll think you will see through time and think you're dead while you are reading Tolkien.
My brain is dying a slow death over dwarfish songs, and yeah, I can't...
Oh, no, there is one point in it where you have watched... Okay, you know in the movies, that point where, okay, Merry and Pippin have helped the trees defeat Saruman, spoilers, yes. And then Legolas and Gimli come and you meet them, and they just go, what have you two been up to, and this and that kind of thing. That's all very well and good in the movie. In the book, you read both plot lines. Like, you read Gimli's plot, and then you read Legolas's plot, and then you read Merry and Pippin's plot, and then when they all hook up, instead of like cutting away and being like, oh, they filled each other in, no, you're subjected to 4.5 pages where they recap everything you just read. Like, it violates the basic principle of writing, which is don't give the reader the same information twice, and just does it ad nauseum.
Well, thanks, Kelley. We're going to get you to read Treatment, which is a short story you wrote for Chillers from the Rock, which was released this past April.
Treatment. Joan wakes to the heavy stink of rancid meat. Her head lifts when she gags, peeling her cheek off a cool, smooth surface. In the small circle of light sagging from a single shaded bulb hanging above, she sees it's a table, no bigger than a manhole cover. On its other side is an empty armchair with supple cushions. The smell comes again. It rolls across her tongue, coats her mouth. A dry urge starts low in Joan's belly. She tries to stand, to put some space between her and the stench, but is pinned to a metal stool by a weight. No source, no substance. A soft shuffle skirts the light. Time to start treatment. The reek in the air shifts. Joan can feel it pull away, sense it licking the edge of the lamplight. It's faint enough that she can take a breath without retching, that she can swallow and clear her throat. Who's there, she says. The words are shaky, not much more than a whisper. She clears her throat again, trying to exorcise the weakness from her voice. A girl, not much taller than the table, pads out of the darkness on bare feet. Smooth blonde hair swings across the shoulders of her pale blue nightdress as she hoists herself up into the cushioned chair. What's happening to me? Joan asks. I told you, this is treatment. The child's light, girlish voice is at odds with the adult words and inflection. Joan searches for an explanation for where she is, what's happening. She catalogues the symptoms: sensory hallucinations, racing heart, overactive fear response. Maybe she's suffering a severe fever, or last night's cocaine could have been laced with PCP or psilocybin. She'd have to tell Steve that his product was turning to crap. Her training tells her the right approach is to disengage from the hallucinations, try to ground herself in familiar reality. But the child's assumption of authority is like an electrified needle through her skull, sending sharp shock bursts to a point buried in her brain. She can't help herself. Child, let me off this stool. It's a command, but offered in the soft, even tone Joan uses on the pediatric ward. She tries to make eye contact, a show of confidence and sensitivity, but the girl keeps her head bowed, smoothing her nightgown down over her knees as she settles into the chair. Treatment is more effective if you sit, she says. No deference, no fear. Let me off this stool, Joan explodes. Thick muscles built over hours prowling hospital corridors bunch and flex in her legs as she strains to stand. She shifts from side to side, gripping the table edge. She's rooted to the stool, and the stool is rooted to the floor. Joan, you're going to hurt yourself. The reproach floats above the rough fury of cursing and movement across the table. Joan freezes mid-lunge, panting. How do you know my name? I'm Anna's friend. She's told me about you. The child's head is still bowed. She's scratching small bits of lint off the lace cuffs of her nightgown. Anna. Thin, pasty Anna, wheezing her way through the ward, always missing her pajamas. A 12-year-old waste of bed space. Her constant wet cough thrums Joan's nerves. Anna has no friends. The only people that visit her are her parents. You're wrong, Joan. Tilting her chin up, the child looks across the table through light-reflecting obsidian eyes. Anna has me. The hairs on Joan's arms stand at attention, and her heels pound out a back-pedal beat. Still trapped, she lunges forward, fingers curled into claws, raking the air in front of the child's face. It took me a long time to find the right word to describe you, Joan. The child doesn't blink. Her wide eyes stare into Joan's, her face relaxed. What word suits a person children look to for help, but who does everything she can to hurt them? The child tucks her legs up under her on the chair. I try not to use labels in my treatment, but you're special. The more I found out about you, the more I needed an anchor to help me understand you and to frame these sessions. Evil, vile, any of those words would work. Smearing a bacteria culture onto Anna's lip balm? Watching the girl use it to salve her dry, cracked lips? Pure sadism. I was observing you by then. I could see how hard you worked to keep your mask of concern in place. You're very good at hiding your satisfaction, one of the best I've seen. Joan is sweating now, her arms tiring. The girl's face remains just out of range of her swiping hands. The child continues. I decided the best way to think of you was as a predator. A predator has cunning and persistence. She blends into her environment and waits. You're very good at hiding. A predator targets the weak, the solitary, like Wendy and Mark and Peter, and now Anna. The problem with a predator is she gets comfortable when she thinks she's at the top of a food chain. She gets careless, loses patience, stops worrying if she'll be seen. Winded, Joan leans on the table. Its surface softens and her hands sink into it like two brands melting plastic. She screams and throws her weight from side to side. The table holds tight. Anna saw you, Joan. You rushed things, didn't take your time with Peter. The air in his IV tube was a risk as it was, but you didn't even check over your shoulder before you pressed the plunger on the syringe. Joan's screaming morphs into a snorting grunt of rage. Flecks of spit gather in the corners of her mouth. That's how I found Anna, because of your mistake. She knew nobody would believe her, that she'd be trapped with you as her nurse, watching her and waiting. She curled up on her bed that night, cringing in a dark pit of fear. She spoke into that empty void for help. I heard her, and I came. To show you you're not at the top of the food chain, Joan. Joan's mind races on adrenaline, trying to outpace the terror and looking for an explanation of the trap she's in, for the child's knowledge. A thin wedge of rationality pierces her panic. Hallucinations. She has to remember that she's hallucinating. She nurtures the idea with deep breaths, feeling her heart rate slow and the blood return to her extremities. She tests a small laugh. It helps her settle. This isn't real. You're not real. Nobody knows. Tension unwinds in her shoulders. Would you be able to smell that putrid stink coming off you if this wasn't real? The gut-roiling stench surges back into Joan's nostrils. She feels the bile rise into the back of her throat. But you've seen patients with phantosomia. You know smells can be imagined. But if this isn't real, would you be able to feel pain, Joan? The woman's trapped hands tingle. She watches as the flesh of her fingers splits and tiny maggots crawl out. The slits spread along the backs of her hands, up her forearms. The skin turns green and gelatinous. Patches of bone peek through. She rears up in panic and agony. But maybe it's pain disorder. Your brain telling you that there's pain when there's no physical cause, because obviously your body isn't really rotting off your bones. Is that what you're thinking? Joan isn't thinking. Terror is lighting her nervous system on fire, flushing every thought from her head except a single wailing imperative she can't obey. Run, run, run! The girl leans across the table. Her eyes grow wider, the pitch-black orbs distorting the features of her face. Her mouth, curved into a crescent by the flattening pressure of the nose above it, barely opens when she says, "You're wrong. It's real. This is treatment." The slick smell of decay slides down the back of Joan's throat, cutting off her scream. It's a palpable presence in her belly, expanding and pushing out on her stomach until it has to come back up. A gush of thin yellow fluid spurts from her mouth. It covers her hands and forearms and seeps into the open fissures. She's gulping air. Her lungs can't produce oxygen fast enough to meet the demands of her brain. A dark ring creeps around the edge of her vision, shrinking her focus to only the child's face. The black eyes have merged into a solid, inky circle. The skin around it stretched so thin that her nose and mouth have disappeared. The single eye no longer reflects the light. It devours it, like a deep, empty crater, a maw, coming for her. It meets the diminishing range of her vision until everything is black. She is consumed. A deep pressure starts behind her breastbone and pain flares across her back, spreading down her ruined left arm into her neck and jaw. The scream finally tears through the constriction in Joan's throat, a wailing siren devoured by the dark. Joan is lying down. Her head and body are supported, cushioned. She's in a bed. Her eyes snap open, but blinding brightness forces them to close. She tries squinting to let them get used to the light. Shapes are indistinct, splotches of color. She takes a deep breath, inhales the soggy smell of cold green beans and mystery protein. Hospital food. The knowledge strikes as a light pain spreads across her chest and presses into her breastbone. Be careful, you've had a minor heart attack. Your chest is going to be sore for a while. Joan can make out the words, but they're fuzzy. They're coming from a small form fiddling with a dark square box next to her bed. The box beeps. A heart monitor. There, says the shape. A pink blur walking around the bed to tug closed one of the curtains on the window. The pink clothing darkens to magenta in the dimness. Nurse's scrubs. Tears well up in Joan's eyes and her hands clench the coarse blanket covering her body. Thank God, it wasn't real. Most people recover from their first heart attack, no problem, says the shape. A woman. Joan's eyes are adjusting. She can make out a petite form with long blonde hair tied up at the base of a delicate neck. A bit of activity, a better diet, that usually takes care of it, the woman says as she takes the edge of the second curtain in her hand and flicks it closed with a little jump to give her extra momentum. But rest is the most important. A good night's sleep. Napping during the day. The words are right. Joan would say the same thing to a person recovering from a heart attack, but there's something wrong with the voice delivering them. It's high and light, like a child's. Joan's heart starts to hammer. Uncontrolled, no care or caution to the flare of pain creeping out from the center of her rib cage. The tiny woman turns. In the dim light, Joan can make out her black eyes, shining like glassy marbles in her pale face. There won't be any rest for you, Joan. Joan is crying again, tears of relief flushed out by those of dread and panic. The smell of hospital food fades, and a rank rot creeps into Joan's nostrils. You said this was my treatment, she croaks. You're going to kill me trying to make me better. The girl woman giggles. Joan, I said this was treatment, not your treatment. I'm here to treat Anna, to cure her of you.
All right, Kelley. Well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.